Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to the marble streets and perfumed gardens of ancient Rome, where wealth meant shade and sunburns were for peasants. You begin in the Forum, under a sky so clear looks painted on. There's no breeze, no cloud, just that hot Mediterranean sun beating down with the smug persistence of a god who skipped breakfast. Around you, sandals slap polished stone. Laurel leaves rustle somewhere above. A street performer fans himself lazily with a bunch of goose feathers tied together at the base with twine not a prop. You realize what a primitive parasol. Because here's the thing. Umbrellas existed in Rome. They weren't quite umbrellas as you know them, more like handheld architecture, but they were very real. And tonight, you're going to walk among them. You turn a corner and enter a wealthier part of the city. You know this because the air smells less like fish guts and more like imported perfume. And also because someone just walked past you carrying shade, not creating it, not standing under an awning, actually carrying their own personal patch of knot-sun dot. It's a woman, maybe 20, with hair twisted into glossy ringlets that bounce as she walks. Above her, an open frame covered in dyed linen shields her head from the sun. She doesn't hold it herself, of course. A slave does. The pole is long and delicate, topped with gold-painted trim. The fabric? A deep indigo, probably imported. Probably expensive? And the effect? Spectacularly unnecessary dot. Welcome to the world of the Roman parasol. The accessory that shouted, I do not work. I do not sweat, and I certainly don't squint. This isn't new behavior either. By the 1st century BCE, elite Roman women, especially those parading through open markets or lounging in garden villas, had made portable shade a fashion. Necessity. These weren't umbrellas in the modern sense. They weren't waterproof or collapsible. Most didn't even close. But they were elegant, often made of paper-thin silk, goose feathers, or treated papyrus. The handles? Sometimes ivory, sometimes gilded wood, sometimes carved into animal shapes that looked like something out of a very board. Artisans fever dream. Mainstream fact. The Roman word umbraculum, little shadow, is the root of our word umbrella. The objects were real, commonly referenced. In poetry and art, they were status signifiers long before they were. Practical tools. You dodge a pushcart and watch as another pair of parasols pass. This time, twin girls share one, held high by an older woman in russet robes. It dips a little in the wind, casting a flickering shadow over their curls. You notice the fabric faded, likely reused, patched in places. Not everyone's shade is luxurious, but it's still shade. Quirky fringe detail. One archaeological theory suggests that some early parasols had metal frames and were so heavy they required both a servant and a tripod stand when not in use. Because nothing says, this is for comfort, like something that throws out your back. Still, to be shaded in Rome meant more than just comfort. It meant leisure. Whitened skin, while not always a universal beauty ideal, was associated with not working in the fields. A tan meant labor. Pale meant poetry. If you needed a parasol, it meant someone else picked your grapes and cleaned your mosaic floor. You keep walking, the city buzzing around you. A group of young boys play dice in the shade of a temple column. A dog pants in the shadow of a vendor's stall. But above them all, cutting through the heat like a feathered halo, the parasol moves like a slow, deliberate punctuation mark, reminding everyone it passes that this is not a tool for the masses. It's a crown of cloth. Historians still argue whether these early umbrellas were purely decorative or had functional engineering. Some say they blocked sun well. Others suggest they were flimsy, ceremonial things meant to be seen, not used. But as you squint up at a particularly flamboyant specimen with painted stars on its underside, you suspect the answer is both. Romans loved dual purpose. If it could flatter your ego and serve a modest function, even better. You pause near a fountain, watching steam rise from the water's edge. The sun presses down, relentless. And in that moment, you kind of wish you had a parasol. Not the practical kind, the ridiculous kind. Covered in peacock feathers, perhaps. Or stitched with an ode to sleep and wine. Something gloriously overdone, just to spite the heat. Instead, you fan yourself with your sleeve and look around once more. Because here in Rome, under this golden sky and this weirdly performative architecture, the umbrella isn't shielding you from the rain dot. It's shielding you from being ordinary. You slip into the shade of a portico, the cool stone a welcome break from the heat. A vendor selling honey cakes fans herself lazily with a folded scrap of papyrus. And you can't help but think, even in ancient Rome, heat exhaustion had its own choreography. You watch as someone across the street approaches a domed building with marble columns, perhaps a bathhouse, perhaps a wealthy household. Either way, what catches your eye is what trails just behind him. A servant, barefoot, carrying a closed bundle of cloth and sticks, a folded PARSOL dot. Yes, some Roman parasols could fold. Not collapse like a modern spring-loaded umbrella, but fold inward gently, like fans. Historians point to descriptions in texts from the 2nd century CE that refer to umbella complicated, folded shades. These weren't engineering marvels, but they allowed the upper crust to carry shade without the need for a second slave to awkwardly store the thing, like a battlefield standard. And as you wander further, you begin to spot these folded parasols, more often rolled into tight scrolls of linen and silk, tucked into baskets, even hung from belts like fans or scroll cases. They weren't just symbols of wealth. They were accessories, conversation starters, and, if we're being honest, sometimes overkill. A fringe detail surfaces in your mind. One mosaic, discovered in the ruins of a seaside villa near Pompeii, depicts a woman seated beside a fruit cart, holding a parasol, not over her head, but shading a bowl of grapes. Did she think her snack needed protection from the sun? Or was it just an aesthetic decision, the way you might drape linen over a picnic basket today? Historians still argue whether this image was literal or metaphorical, if the parasol shaded grapes or symbolized status. Either way, it's very on brand. You turn left into a quieter alley, and now you see parasols stored like sacred relics, propped beside doorways, hung carefully on hooks next to sandals. Some are painted, others embroidered, the most ornate, made from woven palm leaves, dipped in beeswax to create a faint shimmer. Those, you suspect, weren't meant to touch sun at all, just to be admired in passing, like the sword of a senator who never fought. A boy runs past you, chasing a loose amphora lid. He trips, falls, and bursts into laughter. Behind him, his older sister tries to catch up holding a small parasol above their heads. It's crooked, slanted, utterly ineffective, but it's there. Shade is something to strive for, not necessarily something to achieve dot further along. A temple square opens before you. Worshippers gather beneath banners fluttering in the sun. Incense burns in steady curls. At the edge of the scene, a priestess stands, her head entirely obscured by a stiff parasol that resembles a golden fan. Her robe glints with thread. The parasol? Decorated with stitched sunbursts. You don't know if it's part of the ritual or just her personal flair, but it adds to the reverence of the moment. Romans loved spectacle. And if something as basic as staying cool could be turned into a stage prop, it was. Some parasols were rumored to be scented infused with rosewater or myrrh, so that when the breeze hit just right, the person beneath it exuded calm opulence. Can you imagine walking under one of those at a dusty forum market? Everyone sweating around you, and you smelling like a perfumed letter. Of course, not all umbrellas were handheld. At some point, richer Romans began designing their homes with built-in shade structures, pergolas, overhangs, vine-draped trellises. But even there, the umbrella persisted, now as indoor decor. One villa in Herculaneum was found with wall frescoes of women lounging indoors, parasols suspended above their couches. Literal painted shade, because if you couldn't live in luxury, you could at least be seen lounging like you did. The sun dips a little now. Not much, but enough to soften the glare. You pass a fabric merchant packing up his stall, rolling dyed cloth back into crates. One bolt of saffron silk gleams in the fading light. He holds it up for a woman examining parasol materials. She nods, then gestures to the bronze rivets beside it. A new parasol, you suspect. Custom shade dot, and here's a mainstream fact worth savoring. Roman poets, like Martial and Ovid, often referenced parasols in their verses, not just as weather tools, but as symbols of romance, flirtation, and status. There's a famous passage where a woman flutters her parasol deliberately to catch a man's eye, the same way someone might accidentally drop a glove. Subtle gestures. Grand consequences. You turn a corner and notice a cluster of children, watching a puppet show from beneath a makeshift canopy fabric stretched between two sticks. Not a true umbrella, but a shared shade. You smile. Even here, play and practicality overlap. And as night begins to hint at the edges of the sky, you realize something odd. For an empire obsessed with domination, Roman parasols had no practical conquest. They weren't exported with legions. They didn't change battle strategies. They didn't make it into standard soldier kits or imperial decrees. They just made life slightly nicer. For some, which, depending on how your day is going, might be enough. You drift past a cluster of fruit vendors and into a quieter quarter of the city, where the paving stones are smoother, the air slightly perfumed with olive oil, and crushed thyme underfoot. Up ahead, a shaded courtyard peeks out between buildings, framed by high brick walls and draped with vine leaves. You pause, catching the faint chatter of women spinning wool, the clack of distaffs mingling with laughter. And just beyond them, a parasol not held, not hung, but planted firmly in a terracotta base beside a woven stool. It's large, surprisingly so, with panels of alternating red and indigo linen stretched taut over a bamboo frame. A few gold tassels shimmer on the yawl edge. This isn't a travel parasol. It's a station parasol, meant to stay, to guard a particular spot from the afternoon glare. Its owner, you guess, must be someone who spends many hours in this spot, in this posture-spinning, chatting, drinking diluted wine from a clay cup that now rests beneath the shade. Romans didn't just use umbrellas for motion, they built moments around them. A young girl scurries past with a basket full of flower heads, probably bound for garlands. She stops, adjusts the edge of the parasol so that more shade falls over the older women's hands. No one thanks her, but she smiles to herself anyway. You get the feeling it's a ritual. Everyone plays their part. Even the shade gets curated. Find yourself turning over a small fact in your mind. While umbrellas in Rome were considered feminine accessories by most of the elite, they weren't entirely excluded from male use. In certain settings, especially theatrical ones, actors on stage would use elaborate parasols as props, mimicking aristocratic women, or sometimes even mocking them. Historians still argue whether this was affectionate satire or thinly veiled resentment at luxury's gender coding. Either way, the parasol stood as an icon of visibility. You step back onto a busier street now, where a group of young men in togas lounge on a bench, gesturing wildly with their hands in debate. One of them, laughing so hard he nearly chokes, on a date, lifts a small parasol with a peacock feather handle. He's not holding it above himself. It's shading a clay jug of water. His friend points and howls with laughter. The parasol flutters. The shade shifts. Someone swats at a bee and misses. Even in satire, shade had style. Further down, an older woman wearing a russet tunic and a wide-brimmed straw hat sits quietly near a fountain. A parasol rests across her knees. She's not using it. Not even holding it upright. Just keeping it close, her thumb gently tapping the carved handle. Like a cane. Or a memory. A fringe image tugs at your thoughts, one recorded in a crumbling manuscript from the late Republic era. An image of a funeral procession, with a slave carrying an open parasol over the litter of the deceased. The deceased, mind, you, already laid to rest in a covered platform. Yet still, shade was granted. Historians suggest it might have symbolized honor, or simply been for show. Either way, it says something. Shade wasn't only for the living. You stop in front of a fabric shop, where bolts of cloth hang like tapestries from hooks. One particularly stunning piece, wisteria purple, with embroidered acanthus leaves catches your eye. A woman inside holds it up beside an existing parasol frame. She squints, steps outside, raises the cloth to the sunlight, frowns, too sheer. Back in she goes. Custom parasols were a cottage industry. You think of modern umbrella racks, and laugh Romans would have been horrified to use the same drab cover as their neighbor. Every parasol was a fingerprint. And the wealthy? They didn't just buy them, they commissioned them. Still, practicality wasn't always the point. In a side alley, two young children play with a tattered parasol. The fabric torn, the frame crooked. They giggle as they take turns spinning under it, the way one might spin beneath falling leaves or between hanging laundry. The parasol wobbles, leans dangerously, and then, miraculously, rights itself. They clap, no shade offered. But fun delivered. And that's another Roman truth you're starting to realize. Not everything needed a purpose. Sometimes it just needed presence. Umbrellas weren't necessary in the way aqueducts were, or roads, or grain rations, but they stitched softness into an otherwise angular world. And for a society obsessed with strength, image, and order, that softness mattered more. Then they admitted. You pass a scroll seller, his wares laid out like fish at market. A particular title grabs you, De Re Umbellis, or On the Matter of Umbrellas. It's not a real scroll, obviously. Probably a parody or bawdy comedy. Still, the fact it exists means something. Even their jokes had PARASOLS dot as the sun lowers again. The streets begin to thrum with quieter energy. Shopkeepers packing up, lamps being lit. A donkey brays somewhere behind you. You glance one last time at the fabric-draped parasols leaning in doorways. The ones shading benches, the ones folded and forgotten by fountains. They look like flags, like resting birds, like punctuation marks in the sentence of the day. And just like that, you realize the umbrellas of Rome weren't unnecessary at all. You follow the winding rhythm of cobbled streets, the way a breeze might trace cracks in an old mosaic. The sun dips lower now, the golden hour spilling across terracotta rooftops and catching on bronze fittings. It's cooler in the alleys, where shadows stretch longer, and the scent of olive brine drifts up from market barrels. You pass an open doorway. Inside, a Roman matron leans over a low table, arranging fruit on a platter for the evening meal. Her parasol, strikingly pale teal, hangs on a hook near the entrance. Not in use, but ready. Always ready. The Romans called them umbracula little shadows, and they weren't just accessories. They were status. To carry an umbraculum without holding it yourself, that was the ultimate sign you'd arrived. You had someone to shade you, someone to worry about your exposure. You were, in a very literal way, Too important to sweat Dot, so when you turn the corner and see a senator's litter passing, it makes sense. 4 slaves bear the cushioned platform. 2 others walk beside it, but it's the final attendant, young, slim, utterly silent, who catches your eye. He's carrying an ornate parasol, its canopy rimmed in embroidered laurels. As the litter shifts direction, he pivots smoothly, ensuring the senator's face remains dappled and cool. You realize this person is a human sundial. A moving shade. The senator doesn't glance up. That's part of the point. Shade just happens to him. Historians still argue whether such attendants were trained specifically for the task, or whether they were simply folded into a general retinue. But there are scattered records, snippets of poetry and stage comedy that reference the shade boy, often with envy or ridicule. One satirist wrote, "He moves not to serve, but to follow the shadow." And yet, envy aside, parasol bearers had to be precise. Misplace the angle, and the sun hits the wrong cheek. Linger too long under a canopy, and you're accused of vanity. It was a balancing act, part etiquette, part geometry. You stroll now past a row of stucco houses, their windows dark with linen curtains. On a small balcony, a man plays a lyre, the notes sweet and meandering. Above him, a square awning stretches out, really just a stationary parasol in disguise. Beneath its modest shade, a dog sleeps with one paw twitching in dream. No one watches. No one needs to. This is shade without showmanship. A private lullaby. You cross through the forum, slower now, your feet whispering against ancient stone. It's quieter than usual. Perhaps the day's heat has drained the orators of their flair. You spot 2 merchants bartering half-heartedly near a cart of dates. One fans himself with a woven fan. The other, cleverer. He's propped a miniature parasol on the edge of his cart with a chunk of marble. It shades a plate of fig pastries. Priorities. Shade, you realize, wasn't just for people. It was for olives, for honeypots, for temple offerings. One temple inscription even speaks of the divine protection of shade. Whether metaphor or literal linen, it's hard to say. But you wouldn't bet against the cloth. Further on, a priest adjusts the decorations on a statue's pedestal. Offerings have been left: grapes, a coin, and curiously, a folded piece of dyed cloth. Maybe it's a sash, or maybe it's the remains of a parasol cover. An offering of comfort, a whisper of leisure gifted to the gods. Fringe detail? There are carvings in Pompeii barely preserved that show parasols used in processions, not for people, but for statues. Imagine that. Even the divine were shaded, as if the heavens themselves respected the sun's sharpness. You pause beside a public fountain where a boy sits dangling his feet. His tunic is rumpled, his cheeks sticky with honey. In his lap lies a broken parasol. Child's toy version, really. He spins it slowly, watchful, as if testing its magic. Even he knows the umbrella carries a whisper of power. It draws eyes. It draws story. And then a breeze. It lifts your hem. Ripples the puddle. Flutters the scrap of broken parasol in the boy's hands. There's something oddly cinematic about it all. The quiet shift from spectacle to symbol. How umbrellas, once used to block light, now seem to attract attention. They've gone from tool to trop. That type, a Roman general whose name escapes you, entered his triumph, not with a sword aloft, but with a vast golden parasol carried behind him. Historians still argue whether it was satire, reverence, or just spectacular vanity. Regardless, people remembered it. Not the conquest, not the territory. The shade. You imagine the scrolls years later. He returned triumphant under a cloth of gold. Nothing else. As the light thins to dusk, you spot one last parasol closed, leaning against a step near a tavern side door. Unattended. Ordinary. Frayed, yes, but functional. like it's waiting for its owner to finish their wine and re-enter the world, to pick it up and resume this slow ritual of selective darkness. And you think, in a city this bright, it takes effort to rest, to cool, to disappear, if only a little. The sun finally slips behind the rooftops, surrendering the sky to a faint lavender hush. You walk slower now, the evening settling into your joints, like cool linen against sunburned skin. Rome exhales, doors close, lamps flicker, sandals scuff. Softer against stone, but the parasols haven't gone away. If anything, they've multiplied, folded under arms, propped beside steps, draped over market stalls like sleeping birds. Their work is done for the day, but their presence lingers. Even at rest, they hold attention. You pause near a domus where music hums faintly through the stone walls. A dinner party. You can smell grilled fish, fresh mint, wine heavy with resin. Then you see it, a small parasol, tied open and hung from the corner of a pergola, not for function, but ambience. The candlelight beneath it glows gold, casting a soft dome of warmth on the conversation below. It's become a lantern, a decoration, a signal. This is leisure. Elevated Romans didn't always separate utility and beauty. In fact, they preferred things that blurred those lines. A bathhouse might have murals. A kitchen might host a poet. And a parasol? It might become a centerpiece, or a flirtation tool. One poem mentions a young woman twirling her parasol, not for shade, but to draw the attention of a certain baker's son. Historians still argue whether these were real accounts or literary fantasy, but they agree on this. Parasols worked. Passive. They made things happen. You head toward the Subura district, now Rome's bustling underbelly. Here, the streets narrow. The buildings lean inward like gossiping old women, and the parasols shift too. No longer ornate or embroidered, but patched, plain, practical. One leans against a vegetable cart, its linen stained from years of use. Another shades a mother and baby sitting on the steps. The child asleep on a folded tunic dot. You see a boy no older than 10 carrying a basket of olives on his head. Above it, a comically small parasol, mounted with twine to the basket rim. He's sweating anyway, but grins as he passes, proud of his invention. You can't help but smile. Necessity may be the mother of invention, but vanity is its flirty aunt. You pass an open courtyard where an older man in a saffron tunic teaches a younger apprentice how to rewrap a parasol's cord. The frame creaks, the cloth flaps. It takes several tries and a few muttered oaths, but eventually the canopy collapses neatly with a soft click. The boy beams. The old man nods once. No high praise, but high praise isn't Roman. They show affection in craft. Some parasols, it turns out, were collapsible. Ingenious designs using bone, bronze, or pliable reeds. The mechanisms varied. Some snapped, others folded like fans. A few required 2 hands and a prayer. There's even evidence found in a merchant's will of a parasol repair kit, complete with spare spokes and sealing wax. It's oddly comforting. Even in a world of grandeur, people still lost tiny screws and needed backup plans. Further along, in a cramped alley lit by guttering torches, you catch sight of a woman balancing on a crate, hammering something into the wall and iron hook. From a satchel, she pulls a closed parasol and hangs it carefully. It's facing the street, not her window. And that's when you realize it's not for her. It's for the shrine beneath it. A modest niche with a terracotta figurine, perhaps a household god or protective spirit. She adjusts the parasol's angle, shields it, shields them. A fringe, habit, maybe, or just a personal ritual. But even the divine, it seems, can benefit from a little cover. Back on the main road, a group of performers entertains a loose ring of spectators. Musicians, dancers, jugglers. One of them, a girl with teal ribbons in her hair, uses a parasol in her act. She spins it, tosses it, ducks beneath it with exaggerated elegance. It's comic, yes, but also hypnotic. The crowd claps. A coin drops into her bowl. A boy whistles. The parasol bows, grinning with its little ribs. Not everything has to be useful. Some things just have to shimmer. You stop for a moment, watching night settle over the rooftops like velvet cloth. Lamps glow behind shutters. Distant lyres echo. And somewhere nearby, a couple laughs softly beneath the canopy. You can't see them, but you hear the laughter. The kind that needs shelter. Even now, after a day spent tracing these unnecessary umbrellas, you feel oddly moved. They weren't armor. They weren't tools. But they were chosen. Carried. Remembered, Dot, and you suspect that's the real secret. The parasol wasn't a barrier. It was a companion. A soft defiance. A way of saying, I won't let the world burn me today. The parasols vanish as the moon climbs higher. It's a quiet withdrawal, like actors slipping off stage after the applause fades. You keep walking, this time toward the quieter quarters of the Aventine Hill, where the air smells faintly of rosemary. An ancient stone, and the streets hold their silence, like a sleeping cat lightly, but ready to stir. Up here, the villas are wider, the courtyards more polished, and the people, you imagine, a bit more precious about their comforts. You spot a litter parked outside one of the domus gates, 4 sturdy men sitting beside it, sharing bread and oil under a flickering torch. On top of the litter's roof lies a folded parasol, neatly tied. This wasn't the parasol of vanity, or even function, it was status. Just like the polished brass on the litter, or the imported silk cushions inside. The parasol had been an extension of identity, a symbol of not walking, of being shielded from the world, not just by shade, but by people. In fact, some historians still argue whether Roman parasols were as much performance as they were protection. The umbrella, after all, was used by the patricia, the noble women of Rome, often while seated, sometimes even indoors. It wasn't entirely about sun. It was about grace, posture, leisure. And while the men didn't carry them openly, because masculinity, as ever, is allergic to shade, they also didn't complain when parasols fluttered prettily over their heads. You slip past an open atrium, where a servant is wiping down the wooden handle of a parasol with oil carefully, lovingly, as though it were a sword. Nearby, on a mosaic bench, a pair of matrons gossip over fig cakes, their parasols leaning upright like sleepy attendants. One is painted with winding vines. The other bears a crude depiction of Neptune that makes you look twice. Fashion was a little louder in the provinces, maybe. Or someone had a sense of humor. Inside a nearby cubicula, a small bedroom where the shutters are ajar, you spot an odd detail. A parasol suspended upside down from the ceiling beam, above the bed. Not open, just hanging there like a mobile. Decorative? Maybe. Protective? From what dust? Insects? Dream spirits? Historians still argue. One fringe theory claims parasols were once used in domestic ritual symbolic canopies linked to fertility or dream protection. No proof, just possibilities. But the image stays with you. And then there are the scrolls. In the study of a modest home, lit by a single oil lamp, a middle-aged scribe writes slowly at a wooden desk. Behind him, shelves grown with scrolls. On the wall, a crude diagram of a parasol mechanism pinned like a hunting trophy. He's not a soldier, not a merchant, just someone fascinated by umbrellas. Maybe he's trying to improve the hinge design. Maybe he's writing the first user's manual. The historian in you grins. The archivist sighs in delight, because this is how things survive, not always in marble or myth, but in fascination. in people who scribble, sketch, repair, and retell. Walk again, this time through a temple courtyard, hushed and echoing, where offerings of fruit and grain sit in clay bowls. Beside one of the statues Minerva, maybe a parasol has been placed like an offering. It's faded, worn. The gesture feels quiet, personal. It doesn't need to be understood, only felt. Later, a light drizzle begins soft as parchment dust, the sort of rain that would send most modern umbrellas snapping open. But here, in ancient Rome, no one rushes. A woman steps outside with her infant tucked into her cloak. No parasol in sight. Just the night and the rain, and a sigh like she's done this 100 times before. You stand in a covered portico and watch as she disappears down a side street, her sandals slapping gently. Not every Romang had a parasol, but they all had weather. And that, too, makes them feel real, human, a little less statue. You round a corner and stumble upon something unexpected, a small outdoor theater carved into the hillside. The seats are empty now, but you can picture it earlier in the evening. Actors strutting, an audience murmuring, and yes, parasols spinning and fluttering like petals in the stands. Roman comedies loved props. A parasol could be a lover's disguise, a stolen token, a villain's shield. It could hide blushing or deliver a slap. Even satire had shade. No, it's just shadows. The parasol's packed away. The stage quiet. You sit on the cool stone steps, looking up at the stars. There's no performance now, just the memory of one. And for a moment, you feel it. The strange hush of a city not asleep, but pretending, holding its breath between scenes. By now, the night has settled over Rome like a velvet cloak, deep, soft, and full of secrets. You rise from the empty theater steps and begin walking again, this time following the winding curve of a lesser-used road that hugs the edge of the city's forum. The stones here are older, more worn, and the air has cooled enough that your breath briefly clouds in front of you. Lanterns flicker behind shuttered windows, casting warm, honey-colored slits across the ground. This is the quieter Rome, the one the tour guides forget. But it's here, in the corners, that the parasols take on their strangest roles. You pass a merchant's stall, long since closed for the night, its goods packed away and shutters drawn. But hanging from a nail outside, in a gesture almost ceremonial, is a parasol. Its fabric is dull, its ribs bent, and yet it hangs like a sign, a promise that the stall will open again come morning, when the sun returns. You smile. It's a weather vane, a timekeeper, a placeholder for daylight dot further down, in a courtyard, filled with moonlit orange trees. You spot an old statue of a woman holding something above her head. Not a sword, not a scroll, but a parasol. At least, that's what it looks like. The carving is worn, the shape too flat to be a fan, too narrow for a shield. Historians still argue whether such figures were symbolic or satirical. Was she a goddess of shade? A civic joke? Or maybe just someone who really hated getting sunburned? A fringe interpretation suggests certain parasols were used not just by the living, but in funerary rites small, decorative versions placed with the dead to signify status or protect the spirit on its journey. Few have survived, mostly fragments. But archaeologists have found tiny handles beside urns and scraps of painted linen buried in child-sized graves. You imagine a mother once smoothing the folds of a parasol over a still form, whispering something no history book can ever recover. Now the road dips, descending toward the Tiber. The river glimmers faintly, a dark ribbon in the landscape, and you hear the faint slap of water against stone. A barge creaks softly as it bobs near a landing. Two figures unload cargo by torchlight clay amphorae, linen sacks, and curiously, a bundle of parasols tied together with rough cord. Exported goods? Smuggled luxuries? Props for a traveling show? Or maybe parasols were just another commodity. In the endless Roman hunger for elegance, you pause on the riverbank, gazing across to the opposite shore where the silhouette of Trastevere rises in uneven angles. Somewhere over there, another group of Romans is dreaming, or pacing, or whispering under their own patch of night sky. And that's when it hits you how far the parasol has traveled. Not just across cities or classes, but across meanings. From sunshade to fashion, from ritual to tool, from joke to heirloom. It morphed, adapted, wove itself into stories both grand and mundane. Up ahead, you notice an older woman seated on a low step, her cloak wrapped tightly. She's watching the stars. Beside her, leaning against the wall, is a parasol not in use, not open, just present. She doesn't glance at it, doesn't touch it. But somehow, it completes the scene. And maybe that's the point. Parasols didn't demand attention. They offered it, quietly, consistently, like loyal dogs in linen skin. You retrace your steps a little, taking a narrow footpath now that leads between crumbling garden walls. Vines spill over the edges, scenting the air with damp earth and crushed basil. A wooden door creaks open as you pass, revealing a boy chasing a goat across a tiled courtyard. The goat knocks over a basket. Out spills a parasol. The boy gasps, then giggles, and hurries to pick it up before anyone sees. Even goats, it seems, respect the sanctity of parasols. Another house. Another glimpse, this time through a lattice screen. A woman brushes her hair by lamplight, her parasol hanging from a peg nearby. She hums something tuneless. The room is simple, sparse, but the parasol lends its softness, like a curtain drawn over a harsh lamp. You finally find yourself in a plaza small, round, the kind used for local markets or neighborhood meetings. At its center is a cracked fountain gurgling faintly. Beside it, a makeshift bench. You sit. There are no parasols here, just the memory of them. And still, you feel their presence. Like distant cousins who left early from the party, but left their shawls behind. It's funny, isn't it? How something so flimsy, so seemingly trivial, could feel like such a thread through so many lives. And it's not over. Not yet. Because behind you, a door opens. A child runs out, barefoot and whispering. He holds something clutched in both hands. Tiny paper parasol, the kind used in pastries, carefully stolen from someone's dinner. He sets it in the fountain, watching it float, spin, and finally sink. Somewhere, a poet is writing that down. You rise from the bench slowly, knees creaking just slightly, because even in your imagination, your legs remember real-world physics. The plaza is nearly empty now, the faint echo of sandals on stone fading into alleys. You drift forward, guided, not by a destination, but by curiosity, tracing the parasol's path as it meandered through the city, from aristocrat's shade to child's toy. You pass under a stone arch, its keystone carved with worn Latin that your high school classes never covered. The alley curves sharply, like the spine of a fish, and you find yourself in a courtyard sunken private, with ivy that refuses to care about empires. In the center, a man dozes on a folding stool. His face is shadowed by a large open parasol, its canvas painted with concentric spirals of indigo and saffron. The parasol, you notice, isn't held, it's propped on a stick, wedged into a crack in the stone. Improvised elegance. His feet twitch once, then settle. You wonder if he's truly asleep or just hiding from his family. Because parasols, it turns out, were also weapons of solitude. Historians still argue whether certain designs, particularly the heavily embroidered ones, were meant more to conceal the user's face than block the sun. A portable veil. A socially acceptable way to say, not today. Nearby, a fountain. Bubbles softly, half swallowed by creeping moss. A girl kneels beside it, rinsing grapes in a woven basket. She hums an off-key tune and glances at you, or through you, or maybe just past you. Beside her sits a folded parasol, stubby and faded, its once bright fringe now tattered. Fringe detail? Roman households sometimes kept multiple parasols, some for show, others for travel, and a few strictly reserved for the dead. You picture a storage room, dust thick in the corners, where parasols are tucked like scrolls of forgotten spells, each one holding a story, each one having shaded someone's face in triumph, in mourning, or in boredom. You duck beneath a low balcony, where laundry drips rhythmically onto the street. Linen tunics flap like tired sails, and among them, a surprise hangs a parasol, open, upside down, its ribs straining slightly against the clothespins. Perhaps someone had washed it. Or perhaps, more poetically, it had become just another thing to dry. The romantic in you prefers that version. On a wall, a bit of faded graffiti catches your eye. Not words, but a drawing. A man, stick-figured, holding an exaggerated parasol. He stands triumphant over a squiggly shape, perhaps the sun, or perhaps a snake. It's childlike or prophetic. You can't decide which street artists of ancient Rome weren't always making protest. Sometimes they were just being silly. Parasols may have even been punchlines. The Roman equivalent of someone wearing socks with sandals. Historians aren't sure if the elite flaunted them sincerely or ironically, or both. Now you're following a rising path, steps worn smooth by centuries of bad sandals. It leads you to a high terrace, overlooking rooftops. There, a couple leans against a crumbling balustrade. They don't notice you. They're arguing softly, hands gesturing, faces flushed. Between them lies a parasol closed on the ground, forgotten in the heat of their conversation. You wonder, was it a gift? A shield? A prop in this little drama? Or maybe just in the way below. A dog barks once, then silence again. You head down, passing a clay tile workshop. The doors are open, and a boy is painting carefully, tongue between his teeth. Not tiles, but the surface of a parasol, its pale cloth stretched wide, and on it he paints vines, birds, and strange little beasts. Not realistic, not precise, just joyful. You realize this parasol will never see a battlefield, or a funeral, or even the marketplace. It will hang in a child's room. A night sky for someone afraid of the dark. Inside your chest, something small size. It's getting late now. Rome darkens further, shadows filling cracks. You move into a narrow street lined with bathhouses. The steam clings to the air, thick with oil and citrus and a hint of burnt cedar. A bather exits, towel wrapped, hair still dripping, carrying a parasol like a scepter, not to shade, just to announce, I was here, I indulged. I mattered. This was a culture of theater, after all. Parasols weren't always for use. Sometimes they were props, stage pieces in the play of Roman public life. You catch your reflection in a bit of polished bronze, distorted, ghostly. You're wearing your own imaginary parasol now, aren't you? Holding it not above your head, but in your memory. You've collected a dozen already, each tied to a different heartbeat in this ancient city. You find another quiet courtyard, this one dim and heavy with honeysuckle. A musician plucks at something stringed. A parasol leans on his chair, not opened, but tilted just enough to catch moonlight. It gleams faintly. Gold thread, maybe, or maybe just dew. You sit again. The stone is cold. You feel your pulse slowing, not in alarm, but in rhythm. And then from somewhere unseen, a child's voice calls, "Don't forget your umbrella." A laugh follows. Distant, real. You smile. Even now, After all this time, the parasol remains not because it was necessary, but because it was loved. The street begins to slope downward, gently, like the descent into a dream. You follow the curve without question. There's something calming about the direction downhill paths require less decision, less effort. Just gravity and time doing their thing. The parasol, now firmly lodged in your imagination, hovers behind your thoughts like a paper moon. You wonder where it will show up next. As you round another corner, you stumble upon a market that's mostly closed for the day. Shutters drawn, stalls empty, but a few lingerers still haggle over figs and barley. In the corner, a cloth vendor is rolling up bolts of fabric with weary hands. Among them, a bolt of crimson and indigo silk meant, perhaps, for the lining of a senator's toga. Or maybe more excitingly, for a parasol destined for a parade. Because not all parasols were subtle. Some were deliberately extravagant. Historians still argue whether certain ceremonial umbrellas, especially those gilded or dyed with rare Tyrian purple, were genuinely functional or purely symbolic. More canopy than cover, more spectacle than shelter. You remember one emperor Elagabalus known more for scandal than statesmanship, who supposedly employed parasol bearers, not just for sunshade, but to guard his complexion from moonlight. Was that true? Was it satire? Scholars shrug, but the story lives on. The line between function and flourish was thin. Especially in Rome. Just ahead, a group of children runs through an open portico, their laughter sharp against the worn stone. One of them carries something overhead, a parasol fashioned from reeds and papyrus. It's falling apart with every sprint, but the child doesn't care. To them, it's a banner, a sail, a crown. A few older boys stand on the steps, watching with that specific expression of early adolescence. Part disdain, part longing. You see one of them hesitate. Then, in a burst of sudden bravery, he joins the game. The parasol passes between hands like a relay torch. Ancient joy disguised as make-believe. Not far off, a woman in saffron robes sweeps her threshold, pausing only to glance up at the sun. She adjusts the angle of the parasol staked beside her. Door not for vanity, not for flair, but to shield a sleeping dog curled in the heat. A quiet kindness, forgotten by most historians. But you saw it. And that's the thing about parasols. They appear in gaps, in the shadows between recorded events. No battles were won with them. No treaties signed beneath their shade. But they were there, present, decorative, decidedly human. You pass a set of marble steps and pause, momentarily uncertain. Two paths diverge. One leads toward a domus quiet, curtained, wealthy. The other leads downhill toward the river, where voices, carrion wine, flows like gossip. You choose the river. Always the river. As you walk, the sounds sharpen. Not louder, just clearer. The clink of amphory, the splash of water against stone. A vendor shouts about salted fish. A donkey snorts in protest. You begin to see more parasols again open now, angled against the low sun. But they're different here, rougher, made from straw or canvas, propped on crates, jammed into baskets. This is the working parasol district. No gold, no silks, just shade. Honest shade. You spot a baker with soot on his face, enjoying a break. Beneath a patched parasol, while chewing olives from a clay bowl, he waves at someone across the street. No words exchanged, just the gesture. The parasol flutters slightly in the breeze. Near the water, a fisherman leans over his net, humming, tunelessly. Behind him, a parasol shades a bucket of eels, not out of compassion, but commerce. Cool shadows mean fresher catches. You grin. Even the fish get parasols in Rome. Then something catches your eye. A small procession, winding along the riverside. Not grand, not mournful, Just a simple parade of musicians, children, and flower bearers. In the center, someone carries a parasol, not opened, but upright, like a staff. It's wrapped in vines. You realize it's not protecting anything physical. It's ceremonial now. A symbol. This wasn't uncommon. Parasols were sometimes carried in religious festivals, meant to honor gods or ancestors, especially in springtime, when renewal hung heavy in the air, and everything, not just people, deserved shade. You drift along beside them, not marching, but keeping pace. Just enough to hear the tambourine, just enough to feel the rhythm. A woman walking behind you whispers something in Greek. You don't catch the words, but her voice is warm, tired, familiar. Maybe she's reciting a hymn, or maybe she's complaining about the price of olives. Doesn't matter. You file it away, add it to the soft chorus of the city. Eventually, the path leads you to a quiet cove where parasols aren't needed. Trees arch overhead, forming a canopy of their own. Natural shade, older than empire. You sit on a flat rock, damp and mossy. The river glimmers, whispering secrets to anyone who'll listen. A small wooden parasol floats by upside down, caught on a current. Maybe dropped, maybe abandoned, maybe released on purpose. It spins lazily, its handle bobbing, and as it drifts, out of sight, you feel something ease in your shoulders. The sun dips lower. A hush falls, not from silence, but from softness. You watch as the last few vendors fold their parasols, their day's work done. Folded shade, pocketed ceremony. You rise slowly, once more. No parasol in hand, but still somehow you feel covered. The streets begin to clear. You notice it first in the shift of sound. Fewer footsteps, fewer clinks of amphory, fewer bargaining voices drifting through the twilight. Rome, ever restless, seems to inhale for a moment. The parasols, too, begin to vanish folded, slung over shoulders, or leaned against crumbling doorways like sleeping sentinels. You wander through a side alley flanked by tall stone walls. It's cooler here, quiet. A cat darts past, its shadow stretching out like spilled ink. Above you, laundry sways on a rope, catching the last amber light of the evening sun. A piece of cloth, perhaps once a curtain, billows outward, vaguely shaped like a parasol in motion. Your mind's playing tricks, but pleasantly so. Turning a corner, you find yourself in a courtyard. It's almost empty, save for a statue of awe. A seated woman holding what might be a fan, or depending on the interpretation, a parasol. Her stone face is serene. The inscription beneath her has faded. You imagine the chisel strikes that carved it, the dusty cough of the artisan. Was she a goddess, a noble, or merely a tribute to something beautiful and unnecessary? Historians still argue whether parasols in Roman statuary were symbols of status or objects of personal reverence. Some suggest they were metaphors for the Yah, heavens covering us with divine favor. Others believe they simply represented luxury, a way to eternalize one's refinement in marble. There's no consensus, just whispers and theories. The statue's shadow stretches long across the paving stones. You follow its line until your eyes land on a small group gathering near the far wall. Musicians, perhaps, or poets. One of them holds a scroll. Another balances a simple frame of wood and linen, a parasol without embellishment, likely used as a makeshift backdrop. It flutters slightly in the breeze, softening the golden hour light. They begin to play a lute, a panpipe, a voice humming low, not for a crowd, just for each other. The parasol becomes a stage curtain, or maybe a canvas, or maybe nothing more than shade. You settle onto a nearby bench, the stone cool beneath you. One of the musicians glances up and nods. You nod back. That's all it takes. As the tune lilts gently through the square. You let your eyes close not to sleep yet, but to better feel the air. It's warm but breathable. Carried on it, faint smells of olive oil and rosewater, dust and leather, the citrus tang of crushed myrtle dot. You begin to picture other parasols, now ones you haven't seen, but somehow know. One held aloft during a lover's tryst on a villa balcony. Another gripped tightly by a nervous bride walking toward her arranged future. One used as a prop in a comedy play at the Forum, twirled flamboyantly for laughs. Another left open in the rain by someone who forgot that they were made for sun, not storms. All these images, stacked and flickering like papyrus pages turning in the wind. You realize parasols were never just about shade. They were stories, held overhead like whispered declarations. The music fades. The musicians pack up slowly, carefully folding the parasol frame and tucking it into a sack beside the instruments. They leave the square one by one until only their footprints remain in the dust. You stand again. The path before you leads up a hill, now your first incline in some time. Your legs protest, but gently. You climb it slowly, each step a soft negotiation with the day dot at the top. You reach a low wall overlooking the city. Below you, rooftops and arches, columns and courtyards, temples and markets, each still holding on to a piece of daylight, though. The horizon has already begun to drink the sun. A parasol sits on the wall's edge. It's old, frayed at the edges. The once vivid pattern has faded to memory, but it's still open, still catching the last threads of warmth like a net of forgotten light. You run your fingers along its ribs. The material is softer than expected, almost like parchment. Was it left here on purpose? A monument? A marker? You sit beside it, back against the stone, and breathe. The breeze picks up slightly. The parasol shivers, then stills. A pigeon coos somewhere behind you. Someone laughs far below. The city's lullaby continues, even as the stars begin to wink into place. And for a moment, you are neither ancient nor modern, neither visitor nor local. Just a figure in the dusk, shaded by something beautiful and mostly useless. And that, you think, is what makes it perfect. You rise slowly, brushing stone dust from your palms, and begin walking again, this time along a narrow garden path, clinging to the edge of the hill. It's quieter here, even the cicadas keeping respectful time. You pass a vine-draped pergola, beneath which two elderly men sit on a marble bench, playing a slow game of la trunculi. One wears a loose indigo tunic, the other a faded russet robe. Both with sandals showing more toe than leather. Between them lies a folded parasol, smaller than most, with a delicate spiral of painted laurel leaves coiling up each panel. Not for show or status, this one looks handmade. Maybe a gift. Maybe a relic from a younger, more theatrical era. Neither man acknowledges it. They play in silence, the rhythm of placement and capture hypnotic. You don't linger, but the image follows you like a footprint in soft clay. As you reach the curve of the path, you spot a child perched on a low wall, trying to open a parasol far too big for him. He struggles, wrestling with the stubborn mechanism until, with a clumsy clack, it springs open, startling a bird nearby into flight. The boy laughs, proud and slightly surprised. He props the parasol up behind him, then uses it like a tent, ducking inside with exaggerated sneakiness. You smile and move on. In the distance, a procession winds its way toward a small temple. It's not grand, nothing like the Capitoline or Pantheon, but it holds presence as shrine to some local deity or household god. Women carry offerings, garlands of olive branches, jugs of wine, woven baskets of fruit. A few of them wear garlands on their heads, and at the front walks a woman in a saffron gown, her parasol a brilliant teal. The contrast is striking. Historians still argue whether parasols in ritual use had symbolic meaning or were simply practical in open-air ceremonies. Some posit they acted as liminal objects, half cloak, half crown bridging the earthly and odd, divine. Others insist they were fashion-forward accessories, slipped into worship like bangles or brooches. The truth, likely, is both. You follow at a respectful distance. The group passes through an ivy-draped archway and disappears into the temple. The scent of incense drifts back toward you, resinous and slightly bitter, like pine and memory. Turning another bend, you arrive in a small square, empty except for a fountain and a sleeping goat. A parasol lies face down near the water, its wooden shaft cracked. You lift it gently, shake off a few leaves. Someone forgot it, or maybe discarded it when it broke. The panels are cream-colored, with embroidered edges now faded to ghostly threads. You prop it against the fountain's rim, a tiny act of restoration. The goat stirs, but does not rise out here. You pause again. The air hums with approaching twilight. Somewhere, a door creaks open, then closes again. Someone sings softly and badly from a window above. The sound floats like a soap bubble and vanishes. It's this in-between time neither afternoon nor night that Rome begins to shed its more performative layers. No grand speeches, no parades, just moments. Breath between the syllables of history. You keep walking, your path now descending gently into another courtyard. This one feels older somehow, the stones more worn, the moss thicker between the cracks. In the center stands a statue of Minerva, goddess of wisdom, war, and strategy. At her feet lies an offering, a single parasol, unfurled and carefully placed. Not gold or embroidered, but simple and blue. The gesture feels tender. Someone brought shade to a goddess of sharp things. You wonder if the Romans believed gods needed rest, or if, like humans, they sometimes longed for softness in their power. You imagine Minerva peering down, amused by the gesture, but not ungrateful. Further, along the path, you spot another scene, a merchant packing up his stall. He sells ink and parchment, you guess, judging by the splotches on his fingers and the smell of lampblack. A closed parasol leans against a wooden crate, its fabric marked with ink blots and writing, as if it were once a canvas or a note someone tried to send skyward. You're tempted to ask the story, but the merchant meets your gaze and shakes his head, smiling. Some things are better left imagined. As night begins to truly settle, oil lamps flicker to life. You pass a young woman lighting one, her linen cap slipping down over one ear. She hums a lullaby while striking the flint. Nearby, her daughter tugs at a short-handled parasol, tied to the front of their small cart, more shade than shield, patched and restitched a dozen times. A family heirloom, perhaps, or just something too useful to discard. You nod to them both, and they nod back, their routine uninterrupted. Up ahead, an archway glows with lamplight. The city doesn't sleep, not fully, but it does dim itself. Like a parasol being closed, you step through the arch, and for a moment, your own shadow flickers into the shape of a parasol on the wall round, soft-edged, reef dot, and then it's gone. You walk on through the cool Roman twilight, footsteps soft against the worn mosaic tiles underfoot. The colors in the sky have started to shift, apricot fading into mulberry, with just a kiss of gold still clinging to the rooftops. You round another corner and find yourself in what was once a patrician's courtyard, though now it seems abandoned. Vines creeping across the colonnade like nature reclaiming a lost bet. There's a parasol, leaning crooked against a crumbling column. It's elegant, but frayed, with a carved ivory handle and panels stitched from alternating green and cream silk. This one clearly belonged to someone with taste, or at least aspirations of it. You can almost picture the former owner reclining here with a bowl of figs and a goblet of wine, shading their face with idle grace as they complained about the cost. A fish dot in one corner, a tabby cat lounges inside a toppled amphora. It eyes you lazily, stretches, and then goes back to pretending you don't exist. You smile, because some Roman citizens never change species dot as you wander deeper into the garden. You pass under a trellis dripping with wisteria. Purple petals brush your shoulders like blessings. The path is scattered with dry leaves and dropped. Parasols in varying states of decay, one with a snapped spine, another with a missing panel. They resemble fallen birds more than tools of leisure now. A quiet army of broken shade. Historians still argue whether parasols in these garden estates were carried primarily by slaves or by the ladies themselves. Some surviving frescoes show servants holding them, but just as many depict the lady of the house lifting her own, perhaps to display independence, or simply because the servant was busy fanning grapes. You enter a shadowed portico, where statues of nymphs peer out from alcoves. One of them, a marble woman with curls like frozen ribbon, has had a real parasol tied to her hand. It's a child's version, barely wider than your outstretched palm, but it's been fastened with care. Someone took time to wedge it into place, as if giving the statue something she'd long been denied. A playful rebellion against stillness. Nearby, a forgotten scroll lies unfurled on a low table. It's a record of household items, lamps, cushions, fruit stores, and tucked between them, rather absurdly, an entry for Umbri Portadil 3 units, portable shade, counted like wine jugs or loaves of bread, proof that even the mundane had a place in the Roman inventory of importance. You follow a stairway now, narrow and uneven, worn down in the center by centuries of uncertain feet. At the top is a small chamber with a single window overlooking the Tiber. The river reflects the last smoldering light of day like spilled ink. A girl sits cross-legged on the floor, facing the window. She's no more than 10, her tunic patched and dust smudged. In her lap, she holds a tiny parasol bright saffron, probably a leftover festival trinket. She spins it slowly with one finger, watching the shadow it casts on the floor dance in circles. It's hypnotic. You watch too, neither of you saying a word. Evening thickens, and with it, the smell of roasted grain and damp terracotta. You find yourself in a cramped market alley where shopkeepers are shuttering stalls. One man sells parasol parts, just the ribs and handles, bundled in twine, stacked like firewood. Another offers painted panels only, rolled like scrolls. A third has an entire stall of handles carved into animal shapes, lions, owls, snakes with ruby eyes. All of it evidence that even in the ancient world, umbrellas were big business. Fringe detail? Archaeologists have unearthed several parasol parts in Roman ruins, but they rarely survive in full. Organic materials, silk, wood, leather don't hold up well under centuries of stone and soil. What remains is the idea, the impression, the purpose, much like the Romans themselves. You pause near the edge of a square, watching a theater troupe strike their set. A painted backdrop comes down, revealing a pile of props, masks, togas, plastic amphorae. Among them, a rainbow of parasols, clearly used in the performance, perhaps to suggest status, to flirt with the crowd, or just to provide dramatic flair. A woman in costume cheeks, still rouged, plucks one up and twirls it absent-mindedly as she chats with a fellow actor. Even. The stage needs shade. Back in motion, you follow a road that narrows until it becomes a footpath. Grass grows between the stones. The city thins. You pass a shrine to Mercury, god of travelers. A parasol leans against the base, left like a coin or a prayer. It's been caught by the breeze, its panels fluttering just slightly. Even gods, it seems, deserve some comfort on the road. At last, you reach the edge of the hill. Below, Rome stretches out like a story, retold 100,000 times. Red roofs, pale domes, smoke spirals, bells in the distance. Your hand rests on the handle of your own parasol, and for the first time, you don't feel silly holding it. Not here. Not in this city where even the unnecessary finds a place in the order of things. You turn, ready to descend. The hill path spirals gently downward, and with each step, the city grows quieter behind you. Rome at dusk always holds a kind of suspended breath, especially when the winds pick up, and the shadows stretch like soft ink stains along the walls. You grip the parasol you found earlier, not for shade now, but because something about it feels like company. You pass by a public fountain, still trickling despite the hour. The water is cool, and nearby, a child has left behind a crude parasol fashioned from reeds and a strip of linen. It's tied with string in awkward loops, definitely more imagination than engineering, but it leans proudly against the basin like it belongs. You picture the child marching around the forum earlier, parasol raised high, fending off both imaginary sun and invisible foes. Defense, display, play, it's all one and the same when you're 8 years old in a tunic 3 sizes. Too large. You cross a bridge now, the arches beneath it murmuring with river spray. Below, merchants pack up their boats, and one man shields himself with what looks like a dyed linen sheet tied over a basket lid. It doesn't really work. Water drips from every edge, but he keeps it in place like a crown, humming tunelessly as he bails water from the deck. Necessity, you think. Romans invented aqueducts and legal systems, but they still wrestled with wet feet and bad weather. Halfway across, you spot a painted fresco along the bridge wall. It's chipped and stained, but clear enough to read. Noblewoman holding a parasol, carried on a sedan chair by 2 sweating porters. Her expression is so smug, you could almost hear her complaining about the roughness of the cobblestones. Above her is scrawled a faint bit of graffiti, likely from some unimpressed laborer. Shade for fools, sweat for men. You grin. Satire is eternal. Past the bridge. The city closes in again. The buildings here are older, the plaster peeling, in warm curls, like the rind of a roasted chestnut. You duck through a low archway and emerge into a small forum. It's nearly empty, now just a dog nosing through a pile of discarded market leaves and a few late walkers making their way home. In one corner, a tiny shop remains open. The sign above the door reads Venustas et Umbri, charm and shade. It's a parasol workshop, clearly. Through the window, you see 2 figures. An older man hunched over a sewing frame, and a young apprentice, carefully oiling the wooden ribs of a new model. The panels beside them hang in rows, dyed in muted hues ochre, indigo, rose madder, and decorated with looping floral patterns or swirling laurel vines. You imagine how light would play through them, casting colored shadows on the stone streets. Below, you linger at the window longer than you mean to. Something about the quiet craft feels sacred, a forgotten art, practiced with reverence. A pause inside a city always in motion. Historians still argue whether parasol making was a prestigious trade in Rome or merely a side occupation for tailors. Some inscriptions suggest guilds existed for it. Others imply it was passed down in families, not unlike pottery or tanning. But there's no denying the detail. Even the humble models bore stitched designs, delicate fringe, or gold leaf accents. Roman shade wasn't accidental. It was curated. You move on, turning down a residential lane where the street lamps flicker from oil low in the basin. Here, the mood changes. The homes are larger, but the doors are closed. You feel the hush of private life, the weight of thick curtains drawn against both heat and gossip. Up ahead, a villa's rooftop terrace glows faintly. A gathering is ending, maybe a birthday, maybe just the kind of lazy Roman evening that stretches into wine-slicked storytelling. Two women recline on a couch under a large striped parasol, laughing quietly. One pours the last of the wine. The other kicks off a sandal and stretches her bare foot into the breeze. Above them, stars begin to wink through the haze. You can't hear what they're saying, but their bodies speak volumes, relaxed shoulders, open gestures. The kind of comfort that only comes when a long day fades into a perfect night. You pause. In the street, unnoticed, and watch. Sometimes you don't need translation. You just need stillness, fringe detail. Romans occasionally perfumed their parasols. Some surviving writings describe fabric soaked in rosewater or pressed with lavender. Buds. That way, shade wasn't just a shield, it was scented. Walking under one became a full sensory experience. Like a mobile garden dot at the far end of the terrace, a servant begins to close the parasol, folding it with the practiced ease of someone who's done this 1,000 times. It closes like a blossom, petals curling inward. The shade disappears, but the moment lingers. You take one last look and keep walking, your own parasol swinging gently from your hand. You're not using it. There's no sun left. But it's still there, still useful in its own way. Because sometimes, the thing we carry isn't about function. It's about memory, about story, about believing that even the most unnecessary object can hold a kind of meaning. A folded parasol, after all, is just a promise of light to come. The road widens ahead, and the stones beneath your sandals shift from uneven to polished, smoother with each step. You're nearing the theater district, now what's left of it. And though the stages have long gone quiet for the night, their presence still lingers like perfume after a performer's exit. Lanterns flicker against colonnades, and fabric banners hang limp in the breeze, their painted masks barely visible in the dim light. Here, parasols once did more than block the sun. They became part of the spectacle. You remember reading that. In Rome's grander arenas and theaters, they didn't just shade the audience, they shaded the stage. Huge canopies, known as villa, were rigged above open-air venues, suspended from masts and pulled tight with ropes. It took entire teams of sailors to manage them. Literally, naval crews were sometimes reassigned for the task. If you could command a sail in open waters, you could apparently manage shade over a gladiator pit. Funny, isn't it? The skills that transcend context. As you pass under an archway, you imagine those colossal sails billowing above, striped in imperial purple, maybe, or dyed with saffron for drama. Below them, nobles lounged on carved benches, sipping watered wine, pretending to be unbothered by the chaos unfolding on stage or in the arena. Shade wasn't just comfort. It was privilege, sponsored by the state. Mainstream fact? The Valerium of the Colosseum could cover about a third of the seating area, operated by hundreds of riggers. It was an engineering feat, decades ahead of its time, but not flawless. Pliny the Elder once complained about a misaligned sail flapping into a senator's wine. One assumes the rigging team didn't keep their posts after that. Fringe detail? Some parasol bearers in the private boxes developed elaborate fan and shade routines, choreographed like dances, so the highborn didn't have to lift a finger for a breeze. Whether this was considered polite service or subtle theater is anyone's guess. Historians still argue whether these routines were genuinely functional or simply more pageantry shade as performance art. You veer left toward a small amphitheater, its marble steps now moss-draped and silent. No actors tonight, just memories baked into the stone. You pause at the top row and sit, letting your parasol rest beside you. For the first time in a while, your thoughts quiet. You think of all the hands that once held parasols here. Servants, lovers, artists sketching, with charcoal under striped shade. A woman scribbling poetry in wax tablet margins, hiding her eyes from the crowd with a curved piece of canvas and carved ashwood. You can almost see her there, lips moving silently as she rehearses a line shew. Never read aloud. This isn't about umbrellas anymore, you realize. It hasn't been for a while. It's about rituals, tools, the things people hold on to shape the world into something softer. You watch as a cloud drifts past the moon, casting the courtyard in a moving veil of shadow. You smile. There it is again, nature's parasol. Effortless. And grand dot in the silence, your thoughts drift back to the streets, to that woman by the fountain with her reed parasol, to the shop with dyed linen panels and gold leaf trims, to the aristocrats sneezing under perfumed silk, all of them, in their own ways, reaching for comfort, for identity, for some control in a world where even emperors couldn't predict the next flood, riot, or poorly rigged SUNSHA. DE. You trace a finger over the stone beside you, its ridges smooth from centuries of robes and togas. You wonder how many of those sat here, parasol in hand, squinting into the light, or laughing beneath the stripes of borrowed shade. Maybe some were bored. Maybe some were deeply moved. Maybe some just came for the breeze. There's a quiet dignity to that kind of ordinariness. Eventually, you rise. The city doesn't demand anything more from you tonight. It only asks that you notice. And you have dot as you descend the steps and return to the street. You pass a discarded fan on the ground spines, cracked, paint faded, but still holding the ghost of some decorative motif. A vine, maybe, or an olive branch. You pick it up without thinking, then tuck it into your belt. Another piece of someone's attempt to hold back the sun. You don't open your parasol again. The night doesn't ask for it, but still, you carry it, because the story isn't over. And there's always more shade where that came from. The road narrows again, curling around the base of a crumbled aqueduct. Bits of ivy dangle from its arches, silhouetted like lace against the starlit sky. You step quietly now, as if the stones themselves are asleep, and honestly, if anything, deserves rest. Its Roman infrastructure. This is the quiet edge of the city, where the wealthy once escaped the bustle for their countryside villas, some with entire wings devoted to leisure. And in these spaces, among the baths and colonnades, parasols lived a second life, not as shields from the sun, but as status symbols unto themselves. Inside one of those now silent courtyards, you imagine a garden path lined with hedges and fountains. A young patrician woman strolls barefoot in her private shade, attended by a slave holding an elaborate parasol made from peacock feathers and dyed silk. She isn't just shielding her skin, she's signaling her place in the world. Parasols weren't practical here. They were decadent. They rustled more than shaded, but they said something. And in Rome, that was everything. Mainstream fact. By the late imperial period, parasols became so associated with upper-class femininity that poets began to mock them in terse ribbons of lace, protecting ladies too delicate for honest sun. Satirical or not, the image endured. Art from Pompeii shows slender handles tipped with crescents, embroidered cloths unfurled with ceremonial precision. Holding one was an aesthetic gesture as much as a functional one. Fringe detail? A few high-status men reportedly adopted parasols, two especially. Actors and orators who feared sunstroke before performances. One rumor claimed the senator commissioned a parasol with mirrored panels on the underside to reflect his face upward and maintain his divine glow. Historians still argue whether this is true or just another sarcastic jab in some long lost satire scroll. You turn away from the imagined villa, your feet kicking dust over what was once a marble mosaic. The lines are barely visible, now just a few colored stones poking through the dirt, trying to remember their pattern. You let your fingers brush the surface. In a way, these stones did what parasols tried to do. They preserved the beautiful bits. They fought off weather, chaos, time. Maybe that's what umbrellas were really for all along. not just to block light or rain, but to carve out a moment of stillness inside a world that never stopped moving. You glance up. There's the moon again, steady, pale, unbothered. It's been watching you this whole time. Your walk slows. The stories feel more distant now, like music heard through a wall. You've followed the arc of a parasol through 2,000 years of weather, class tension, theatrical drama, and mild sunburn. Somehow, it all holds together, stitched by the human instinct to hold something above our heads and believe it. Helps. It's funny, isn't it? All the things we've invented to negotiate with nature. Fires, roofs, perfumes, politics. And somewhere in their umbrellas, a perfect contradiction. So fragile, so ceremonial, and yet persistently necessary. You think again of that first Roman soldier, probably squinting up at a noblewoman under her parasol, and wondering what it must be like to live that lightly. You think of the shopkeep, tightening seams with expert fingers. Of the merchant hawking umbrella with counterfeit silk. Of the servant in the theater, catching a dropped handle mid-performance so his master never breaks focus. Of the widow you passed earlier, still dreaming perhaps, or still waiting. You think of yourself, not as you are now, but as someone standing in a different century, holding a curious thing in your hand and wondering what it's for. And maybe, just maybe, choosing to believe it can protect you from something bigger than weather. The parasol is closed now, its canopy gathered neatly like a sleeping flower. You don't open it. You don't need to. But you feel the weight of it in your hand. Familiar, subtle, like the final word of a sentence you've been writing in your mind since the walk began. And in the hush that follows, you don't hear history ending. You hear it exhale. Word count 1045. Wind down 300 words. So, now, with the parasol folded and the city dimmed, you let yourself drift. The sounds soften. Footsteps become whispers. Breezes become lullabies. The stones beneath your feet no longer demand movement. They just hold you gently, like a cradle of the past. Your breathing slows. You picture that Roman villa garden again. Mosaic glinting faintly under the stars. The air warm with lavender and laurel. You picture a silk parasol leaning against a stone bench, forgotten, but not unloved. Even in sleep, things can wait for morning. Let the rhythms settle now. Let the thoughts pool like rainwater, calm and still. The story has done its work, not to entertain, not to enlighten, just to ease the edges of the day. You're not chasing sleep anymore. You're inviting it. And as your eyelids grow heavier, you remember the smallest rituals, tea mugs, paperbacks, old tunes, or yes, even imaginary Roman umbrellas can be. Enough to guide us home. So let go now. Let your limbs loosen. Let the blankets pull close like temple shadows. Let the night say what it needs to say. Tomorrow, the city will still be here. But for now, rest. Rest well.